It's not like she sat around going, you have to make me queen,
Well, I know recently that you also wrote a piece about Camilla being named Queen Consort, which I think a lot of people were surprised about, at least the timing of the announcement. What were your thoughts when you heard the Queen announcing that Camilla will be named Queen Consort?
Yeah, well, I've reported over the years that Camilla would be made queen. Mm-hmm. I think most recently I did the story in 2018 when a good, reliable source at Buckingham Palace told me that, she was going to be queen. Mm-hmm. And I always remember the palace sent me an email saying, there is no foundation to your story. Mm-hmm. Well, there was a foundation. It was true.
Right.
So I wasn't hugely surprised. But as you say, very, very surprised by the way it was done, and by the way that the Queen used her 70th anniversary on the throne, huge amount of political capital there, to basically legitimize Camilla. I think it definitely, the way that the fact that it was done, not a huge surprise. The way it was done, and for the Queen to endorse her in that way, I think it's really significant. I think it's going to make Charles's life a lot easier, because otherwise the first thing he was going to have to do was come in and break a promise, right. Whereas now it's like, well, I'm not breaking a promise. I'm doing, fulfilling my mother's wishes, And so I think that's, I think it was incredibly generous of her, actually. And Charles has always wanted her to be queen. She, I'm reliably informed, couldn't give two hoots whether or not she's queen or not. But Charles sort of saw it as a sort of insult against the office of the crown, and Charles is very kind of, he's very kind of pompous, and, he believes in the divine right of kings and thinks that he's been, uniquely appointed by God to be the king and blah, 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 and all of this. And all that said, I mean, the reality is, it was always, I think, a kind of holding title and a way of diffusing public anger around Diana and getting her to be, accepted and kicking the door open a little bit and then, working their way in. But yeah, I mean, a significant announcement, I think really, I think there's a feeling that we want a king and queen. Yeah. I do think that here in the UK. So I think, I think it's a good thing.
Definitely.
But, interesting.
Very interesting. You said, you heard about this back in 2018. So this was obviously in the works for quite some time. And, how would you say that Camilla won over the Queen? Because they obviously in the beginning didn't have the best of relationships. They didn't go to the wedding and, with everything with Diana and things like that. So how over these past 20 plus years has she won over the Queen? I
mean, the Queen and Camilla had a terrible relationship. I mean, the worst relationship that you can possibly imagine, to the extent that the Queen, would refer to her as that woman and, refused to be in the same room as her. It's kind of weird as well because her husband, Camilla's husband, is a guy called Andrew Parker Bowles, was a sort of noted Lothario, we might say, on the scene. And, if you talk to anybody who knows the family, they're like, oh, Camilla was like a saint, compared to, and yet the ex-husband imagine it, the ex-husband of Camilla was invited to sort of go racing with the Queen when Camilla was, deliberately excluded, although she was, with Charles. I mean, it's just, the levels of dysfunction in the Windsor family are sometimes quite amazing. But this was unparalleled. But look, I think that how she won over the Queen was just by being really, the complete opposite of Meghan, for example. So whereas Meghan was, very assertive and wanted her voice heard and wanted to put her, be an activist, I think Camilla was very, very happy to wait extremely quietly outside the door, until the door was opened for her and not make a fuss. I mean, basically, it's kind of it's kind of feudal, really, the way that Camilla kind of behaved. But that's what the British royal family is. It's a feudal military structure, and you have to follow, who's the boss and who's in command. And Camilla did it really well. And she also got involved in some really kind of unsexy causes. She got involved in like causes around domestic violence. She got around in all these kind of causes that really no one else wanted to do. They weren't glamorous. They didn't, And so I think that, and she was pretty amazing with the army as well. Like, she was the colonel in chief of a army regiment called the 4th Rifles, and somebody told me that regiment had the worst casualties in Afghanistan. I think 66 men were killed, and Camilla wrote to every single one of the wives, the girlfriends, the parents, wrote to them all, handwritten letter for all of them. And, so there's stuff like that. I also know people who know Camilla and know the family, and like, they will all say to you, she is like, she's the kind of person that you want to call. One person said to me, who knows her really well, said, she's the kind of person you want to call when you've broken up with your boyfriend. She's the person who will console you and say, oh, don't worry about, be understanding, but at the end say, look, don't worry about it. You've got to, there's plenty more fish in the sea, and get on with it. So I think I think her character is actually incredibly well suited to the royal family, of that kind of uncomplaining, get on with it, suck it up, make the best of it. And I think really in the end, she just very slowly and carefully convinced the Queen of that, and the Queen came around to it. Yeah,
definitely. You mentioned before that she probably doesn't give a hoot that she was named Queen Consort. Why do you say that?
I just know that from people who know her, that it's never been a obsession of hers in the way this is Charles's obsession. Okay. This is not. It's not like she sat around going, "You have to make me queen." She's like, she just had the incredibly bad luck of falling in love with the prince,
right?
And not being allowed to marry him. And I mean, it's really. And she was terribly kind of slut shamed by the British media for kind of decades, for the temerity of having had an affair, with Charles. And I mean, it was just like, obviously, there was a whole load of levels going on, but I'm sort of broadly with Camilla. I kind of, I think, I just think we've all got to be big boys and girls and get over these things. You know what? People have affairs. People have relationships. Life's complex. Life is messy. And the idea that you can be king without somebody by your side supporting you is just ridiculous.
Yeah,